Good evening, everyone, as you are all entering. Thank you for joining us for the Miramichal Association's November Science Speaker Series. I'm just going to give it about one more minute before we officially kick it off with Charles Brooks this evening for his journey. And while we wait to get started, can everyone hear me okay? And know that if you have any questions this evening, we will hold our Q&A session closer to the end of Charlie's presentation. And if you have any questions that you'd like to pop into the Q&A section or even the chat box, know that you are more than welcome to do so. All right. Some people are still joining. Give it half of a minute. I have a guest, Pammy, with their hand up. If you have a question for me, you can go ahead and unmute your mic and speak if you need to. Right, we will go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Science Speaker Series presentation for the month of November. I'd like to take an opportunity to thank Bank of America, our lead sponsor of our Science Speaker Series. And without them, we would not be able to make presentations like this evening accessible to all of our viewers, all of our constituents, and all of Nantucket and farther beyond. This evening, I am privileged to welcome Charles Brooks for his presentation titled Island Wakes and Coastal Observations, an Early Career in Oceanographic Engineering. This evening, we will join Charles Brooks for a deep dive into his travels and experiences as an oceanographic research technician and engineer at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Brooks will share his deep connection to Nantucket, his educational pathway, and he will traverse his experiences of his early career. Having traveled all around the world before dropping anchor at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, Brooks is enthused to give insight into his role as a technician and working aboard the RV Roger Revelle during a midlife refit. This presentation will feature some of his most significant research cruises and experiences, culminating in a cruise out of Guam in April of 2022 that led him to his current position with SIO's Coastal Observation Research and Development Center. He will also discuss the work of the CORDC and his noteworthy role in sampling of island wakes and coastal monitoring in the form of a project called Smart Mooring. While currently based in San Diego, Brooks's long life fascination and love for the ocean began by exploring the waters surrounding Nantucket Island. After numerous positions in the marine industry in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, Brooks moved his career to the West Coast at SIO as a research technician in the Shipboard Technical Support Group. Over 4 years, he learned to support shipboard oceanographic research while providing learning opportunities for early career scientists and students on SIO's coastal class research vessel. This role quickly expanded to lead technician of the global class research vessel, Roger Revelle, during which time he oversaw extensive midlife shipyard renovations. Post-shipyard, Brooks supported research aboard the Revelle in the far reaches of the Pacific. In his current position as an engineer and field researcher at CORDC, Brooks's work now includes support of robotic systems, remote sampling platform developments, and field research in the Western Pacific. His talk will cover his career path from New England to the far reaches of the Western Pacific while providing an overview of current research projects. Charlie, it is such an esteemed pleasure to welcome you this evening. Thank you for
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to you and thank you to MMA for creating this forum.
Of course, it's our pleasure. So I'm going to turn it over to you. You can grab control of the screen and the floor is yours.
Okay. Awesome. Everybody can see. Yeah, thank you, Janelle. My name's Charlie Brooks. I am a oceanographic research technician and engineer at SIO. I currently work for the Coastal Observing Research and Development Center. A little bit of background on me. I am a incredibly average surfer and fisherman. I love to scuba dive, I love to be in the water, I love to hike, love to be outside, everything that Nantucket and San Diego both have to offer. A little bit about my connection to Nantucket. Nantucket has been an important part of my life since I was 2 months old. It's the first time I went there. When I was a child, did vacation, eventually started working there in the summers, spending more of my year there. I was a Force 5 candy kid at 13, spent 4 years with Nantucket Boat Basin, 2 years with NCS, and my family has now called it home for 10 years, and I've met some of my closest friends and my wife there. So while I've been in San Diego for 6 years, me and my wife are both lucky to call Nantucket home, and love getting back for summers, falls, winter, and I know that both of our shared love of the ocean really can be traced back to Nantucket. After graduating high school, I grew up in New York City, or outside of New York City. I went to the University of Rhode Island, where I got a bachelor's of science in marine science, focusing mainly on fisheries policy. When I was in school, I studied off campus at the Williams Mystic Maritime Studies program, where we were mainly in Mystic, Connecticut, doing science, history, and policy classes, but did a field seminar off the California coast on a tall ship off of San Diego for a couple of weeks, which was my first look into shipboard oceanography. And after graduating college, thinking I was going to go work in fisheries policy, I became aware of the career path of oceanographic research technicians and doing that field work, and sought to combine my love of science with my love of work with my hands and building things. So that took me to the International Yacht Restoration School of Technology and Trades in Newport, Rhode Island. I spent 6 months in that program learning about electrical systems, plumbing, engines, just various marine systems. And that went to a job at a boatyard in Osterville on the Cape, working as an electrical technician, installing radars, chart plotters, all sorts of stuff on the factory boats, which was a great experience. During that time, I was lucky enough to get what is called a MATE internship through UNOLS. UNOLS stands for University National Oceanographic Laboratory System. It is the umbrella that a lot of oceanographic labs are under in universities, academic institutions, not to mention the entire US academic research fleet, or ARF. They take about 12 interns a year. I was very lucky to get one, and joined the Hugh R. Sharp, which is a research vessel out of University of Delaware, in the summer of 2018 for a 6-week cruise on Georges Bank on a sea scallop survey, an annual survey sponsored by NOAA. We were splitting our time between dredging, so physically, effectively bottom fishing, pulling up specimens, getting data that way, or towing a camera array called the HAB cam, which you can see us loading in this time lapse here, a big tow sled, which flies above the sea bottom with large strobe lights and cameras, and just took repeatedly, we'd fly that for hours or days, and just taking thousands of photos that would give researchers an opportunity to look back at the lab and determine what's going on in that particular ecosystem. I was, the day I wrapped up that internship, a job at Scripps Institute of Oceanography went live as a research technician in the shipboard technical support group. I was very lucky to get a position, and in October of 2018, put my car on the Eagle and drove across the country and moved to San Diego to start a new chapter. So I joined the group as a res tech, research technician, and began learning that role. Our job is to essentially facilitate the execution of science on board Scripps's 3 research vessels and other partner programs. I started learning on Scripps's coastal vessel, the Robert Gordon Sproul, which you can see in that top right photo. And these images are from the Sproul. And essentially the role is you are running the deck, getting scientific instruments and equipment in and out of the water, conducting it safely, keeping people safe, running shipboard acquisition systems, maintaining the shipboard network. And on the Sproul in particular, it's a really invaluable platform for providing early career scientists, graduate students, and undergrad students an experience of what it's like to go to sea, even if it's only for a day or two. So that was how the first couple of months of my job went. And then in January of 2019, I flew to New Zealand to join the ship that I would end up spending the vast majority of, or a large portion of my next 4 years of my life on, the Roger Revelle. The Roger Revelle is a global class research vessel called an AGOR. AGOR stands for Auxiliary General Oceanographic Research. There are 4 ships in the class: the Revelle, operated by Scripps; Atlantis, which is operated by Woods Hole; the Thompson, which is operated by University of Washington; and Ron Brown, which is operated by NOAA. So I flew to New Zealand, joined the Revelle in my first big scale oceanographic research cruise. We were studying methane seeps off the coast of the country. We were using the ROV Jason, which you can see in the bottom right picture there, remotely operated vehicle. So we were surveying these sites with the ship's onboard mapping equipment, diving Jason on them to observe them, and then we were deploying instrumentation and sampling gear like piston cores. There's a very doing a lot of coring in this trip, which a piston core is essentially a large steel tube with a PVC liner and a cutting head on one end, and you essentially lower it to just above the bottom and then free fall it. It slams into the bottom depending on bottom composition, impact speed. You end up retracting it and you bring it up to surface and you have a core, which you chop up in these PVC liners, and then scientists will do onboard sampling, but then they will also go back mainly to University of Oregon, where they have an enormous repository of oceanographic cores that are an invaluable climatological record for scientists. So that goes a long way. They're the lead coring tech on that cruise. He said, pound for pound, if you factor in ship cost, personnel cost, everything it takes to get this, like the mud that we had ounce for ounce is more expensive than gold. So it's super valuable work. The Revelle finished that trip, sailed across the Pacific back into San Diego and straight up to Portland, Oregon, where it entered what was going to be a year due to COVID, ended up being 18 months of its midlife refit. The expected service life of these ships is 50 years. So 25 years in, they go through what is called a midlife refit. Really extensive work. In the Revelle's case, it was replacing all of the engines, going down from 6 engines to 4 more efficient ones, replacing the entire bow thruster for a more powerful and efficient one, replacing improving the ballast water treatment system to reduce chance of invasive species by transporting ballast water, fire suppression, and then not to mention the scientific systems, brand new multi-beam sonars, other hull-mounted instrumentation, faster, more efficient shipboard networking, better lab infrastructure. So I ended up getting tagged to play a part in that project, and for a year, every month or so was going up to Portland in 4 to 6 week stints working on the ship, helping rebuild the infrastructure for the next half of its life. So this is the Revelle in dry dock, getting pulled into it. And just for a sense of scale, you can see there's a person standing down there by the starboard screw. It gives you an idea of the scale of the ship. And this is a little bit later on in the refit, a couple months later. You can see just the extent of the work, and you can see that gap in the bow up there. And that is where the bow thruster was physically cut out of the ship and put in. So there's a lot of new steel on that ship, and it is now on to the next 25 years of its life. Which brings us to January 2021. I joined the Revelle in Hawaii, and we set sail for the Southern Ocean. Not a typical path, but due to COVID, we had to mobilize out of US ports. So this cruise ended up being a 13,000 nautical mile round trip. We were gone for 90 days, sailed from Hawaii to the Southern Ocean and then back again. On this trip, we went to what is called the Great Calcite Belt, which is an area of productivity in the Southern Ocean, where a microorganism, calcium-based microorganism called coccolithophores are especially prevalent. And these drive productivity and life throughout our world's oceans, even though that's where they're kind of centralized as they move throughout the world's oceans. In part, it was a verification of satellite-based measurements. I'm sure a lot of you have seen satellite imagery of the oceans showing blooms of phytoplankton. And as part of the verification of this, it's all well and good with the satellites showing you, but eventually someone does have to go as part of this and actually, for lack of a better word, put a bucket in the water and pull it out and see what we're looking at. And so the satellite imagery in this instance had the researchers convinced they were looking at large blooms of coccolithophores, but it turned out it was actually another microorganism called diatoms. So that was part of that cruise. But we were CTD sampling, hundreds of CTDs on a survey line working south. You can see a larger CTD rosette in the top right there, which is that instrument that was deployed off of Sproul. A CTD stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth. It's the bread and butter of oceanography. I've never done a cruise where one wasn't used. It's very valuable for physical oceanography, chemical oceanography, biological oceanography. And so it has the ability to take samples of readings from various sensors as it goes through the water column, but also in the instance of this rosette in this image has 24 sampling bottles that are triggered by an electromagnetic latch. So you can take 24 individual water samples from various water depths. So we're doing a lot of those. And then we were also towing in a instrument called a VPR, which stands for Video Plankton Recorder, which you can see us recovering in that photo on the left and the bottom one. I'm the guy in the white hard hat. And that is a tow body with a camera in that central hull aimed out towards one of those pods. The pods had a strobe in them, and the camera is focused on about a square or cubic centimeter of water. And we would tow that for hours and days, and it's just taking tens of thousands of images. And machine learning throws out some of those when they see there's nothing in it, but then a lot of them will have some phytoplankton or other microorganism, and researchers will use that for years to come to determine what was growing and productive down there. So that was quite a trip. Icebergs, Southern Ocean, terrible weather. Not my favorite ocean to play in. But a pretty incredible trip. That takes us to the fall of 2021, when I joined the Revelle again on a trip to the East Pacific Rise. So if you look at that faint blue line in this map, that is coming from the Gulf of California down towards Antarctica off the coast of South America, that is the East Pacific Rise. It's not technically classified as a mid-ocean ridge, but it is a spreading zone. I'm assuming that a lot of people on the call are familiar with plate tectonics and understand spreading. So that is somewhere where new seafloor, new crust is being produced, and the plates are spreading from that zone. This trip was called Plume Raiders, and the purpose of it is that we were tracking down hydrothermal vents and sampling them. For those of you who don't know what a hydrothermal vent is, you might have seen them in a nature documentary. These are these black smoking plumes on mid-ocean ridges and rises that are extruding incredibly hot water and are incredible sources of deep ocean biodiversity. So as part of this process, we were mapping the EPR with the Revelle's bottom-mounted instrumentation. Interestingly enough, we actually, on the course of this trip, filled in the last unmapped gap of the EPR. So we were the ship and the cruise that fully mapped the EPR, which is a nice little feather in our cap. And we were doing mapping. We had a large AUV called Sentry on board that is run and operated, designed, built, and operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, right in our neighborhood in Nantucket. This was my first exposure to large-scale autonomous vehicle work, and it doesn't get too much bigger than Sentry. It's about a 5,000-pound vehicle. So we were launching Sentry on suspected vent sites, and it was mapping, and it was taking photos, and then once it would come back, we would use a variety of, again, CTD rosettes to drop down several thousand meters and actually take water samples from the plumes of the hydrothermal vents. So that was quite an interesting cruise. That was another about 90 days. And just that intermixing between autonomous vehicles and physical oceanography was quite interesting. And I think definitely piqued my interest to the vehicle side of things, which is where I am now, which I'll get to. The last cruise I'm going to touch on, and I guess the most impactful of my young career so far, was spring of 2022 out of Guam, which is the United States' westernmost territory in the West Pacific. We sailed out of Guam to the island of Rota, which is 40 miles northeast of Guam. And Rota is very interesting because there is not too much else upflow of it. So if you can picture, it's a very clean flow of water going around Rota, which makes it a great spot to study island wakes and turbulent eddies. So on this trip, I sailed with the lab that I now work for, which is CORDC, the Coastal Observing Research and Development Center. We were using shipboard instrumentation to sample these wakes, as well as autonomous vehicles, including a Remus 600, which you can see in this photo here. It's like that long yellow torpedo. It's an medium-ish endurance autonomous vehicle, underwater vehicle, can go about 24 hours, has a depth rating to 600 meters. And so we were doing subsea sampling with that, surface sampling with the ship's instrumentation, and then using other autonomous vehicles, such as a wave glider, which is a surface vehicle, which I will touch on in a little bit. So that, one of the great things about that, my job as a res tech, was that every cruise is different. I got a lot of exposure to different fields of study, different scientific groups. And I was lucky enough that CORDC came on board, and I thought it was one of the cooler groups I'd ever worked with. And a couple months later, it turned into a job offer. So I joined CORDC in November of 2022. My title is a field researcher. As that implies, I get to go to the field a lot still, which is great. I'm not traveling at my previous pace of 100 to 150 days a year, but maybe 60 around that, which is nice. A lot of our work is in the Western Pacific and the island of Palau. In the field, I can be helping deploy instrumentation, moorings. You can see me there working with one of our local partners at Coastal Reef Research Foundation in Palau, deploying a mooring in German Channel. Can be diving in instrumentation or getting in the water to service vehicles, which is what's going on in the top right picture there. And some of the vehicles that we operate a lot of autonomous vehicles, which I'll touch on, include that vehicle there on the bottom right, which is a Remus 100, smaller sibling of a Remus 600, two-man portable, not as big, not as heavy, about 8-hour endurance, just another vehicle we run a lot of. When I'm back in the office, my work's expanded to doing a lot more mechanical engineering related work and design work. This is just some of the work that I've been involved with, some of the design work I've done. On the left there, that's the top hat element for the smart mooring, which I'm going to be talking about in a little bit. And I will not take credit for that whole model, but I worked on it with a couple of other engineers doing sensor mounts integration, some stuff like that. In the middle to those two images are another vehicle we operate called a WAMV, which is a 16-foot autonomous catamaran, stands for Wave Articulated Modular Vehicle. And the top platform is gimbaled. I've got a video coming up where you'll see that the pontoons actually articulate and keep that top platform pretty stable. So I have headed up a little bit of design on that, including a load cage that we're going to be using for shipboard deployment and recovery, modeling some batteries that we had with this and that top right there that we needed to get done to figure out how to design a battery securing system for this. And then more recovery hoops, stuff like that for another class of autonomous vehicle, which I'll talk about. Also, when I'm in the lab, work can be in the field, running small boats and running robots, doing testing, doing development work, generally assisting the engineers get into the field, get the information they need, helping them design and build things. And coming from my interesting perspective of having a lot of shipboard and at sea experience. So there's been instances where, somebody's looking to design something and aren't necessarily thinking about how this is going to work in the real world. And so that's where I think I bring a lot of good experience. But this is our WAMV testing in Mission Bay, San Diego. Another big part of my job in terms of my role is we have a class of vehicle that we operate called buoyancy gliders. These ones in particular are called Slocum gliders. They're made by Teledyne Web Research, which are based in Woods Hole, right in Nantucket's neighborhood. These are vehicles where they get their drive from what's called a buoyancy engine. So instead of having a thruster, which some of them do to give you a little extra thrust if needed, but they have a oil reservoir inside the hull. And at the surface, that oil will be pumped all the way out into a bladder, which increases the internal volume of that vehicle, making it less dense than the surrounding water, and it will float. So it'll float up at the surface. When it needs to initiate a dive, it retracts that oil internally and the vehicle will dive. It has, you can kind of see in that picture on the right, a set of carbon fiber wings that will bidirectionally generate lift. So it can provide, it can locomote going down and get locomote going up as well. And These are very slow. They're long endurance. Depending on the battery payload, they can go for about 6 months. And by slow, I mean if we're doing half a knot an hour, we're kind of crushing it. That's pretty fast for it. We're doing pretty good. And like a lot of other vehicles, they are a platform for data acquisition. So the vehicle is just a platform carrying sensors. The one that you see I'm working on the right there has photoactive radiation sensors, phytoplankton backscatter sensors, a CTD, small one, dissolved oxygen. I think that's the payload on that one. And then some of our smaller ones just have a CTD. So I manage a fleet of 4 of them. We've got 2 those longer ones on the right that have a really comprehensive payload, but only can dive to 350 meters. The other ones will do about 1,000. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the science that we do, just 2 projects that I'm on, and this one in the coastal observing side of things in the form of wave buoys. So the wave buoy you see on the bottom right there is manufactured by a group called CDIP. They've been around since 1975. We have a pretty close relationship with them. They have an enormous network of wave buoys that are deployed on the US West and East Coast, as well as globally. There's a lot of them around the world. They provide wave data as well as sea surface temperature. They just received $40 million worth of funding from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They're going to be keep going through 2029, which is great to hear. So this network is deployed, and there's other buoys like them, and they're deployed offshore or locally. And then based on that data, analysts can generate predictive wave models to predict local wave events based on offshore data. So enter smart mooring. So the winter of 2023, you may have remembered reading in the news that there was a atmospheric river that hit the West Coast, definitely California, caused a lot of damage in coastal areas, a lot of wind, a lot of storms. In California State Park, Sea Cliff State Beach in Santa Cruz was hit especially hard, suffered $100 million worth of damage. And so California State Parks got us involved and trying to develop a more comprehensive system to understand what was happening around coastal flooding. So this is a couple interesting plots from an extreme wave event from December 28th. You can see on the left, we have CDIP's actual wave buoy stations. So you've got your X and Y latitude and longitude. The color bar is showing your wave height in meters. And so you can see that wave event was pretty significant up in San Francisco, Monterey Bay, less so down in Southern California, Los Angeles, San Diego. On the right, you have a buoy-driven predictive model based off of the data generated by those 2 buoys up at San Francisco and Monterey Bay. So you can see how that can get a little more granular, but there was a data gap. There's not exactly a buoy in Monterey Bay. So that's how we came to be involved in this project. So California State Parks wanted to have somebody develop a system to co-locate with a CDIP buoy that gives them a better look at the environmental conditions and what's going on in the water column surrounding coastal flooding. So I, with a electrical engineer, have headed up this project. I've been in charge of the design and the mechanical side of things. So we have developed this system that we have taken to calling smart mooring. So a CDIP buoy gives you waves via GPS and gives you sea surface temperature. Smart mooring gives you a whole water column temperature profile. There is a 12-node temperature chain, thermistors, temperature sensors, that goes down the wire, terminating at a lead sinker weight that helps hold it vertical. And then inside that green trapezoid you see, there is an acoustic Doppler current profiler, or ADCP, which is an instrument that uses sound and the Doppler effect to determine water velocity, measures currents, measures vertical velocity. And there is also a self-contained, highly sensitive digiquartz pressure sensor inside that bottom mount. The ADCP data and the thermistor data are piped up to a top hat on top of that surface float. That's the little white thing you see there. That has in terms of instrumentation that our lab designs, has a single board computer that we designed in-house that aggregates that data and fires it off via the Iridium satellite network to our shore-based servers on half-hour intervals. So we this is some of the data from a 3-month test we did over the summer. And kind of what I want to draw attention to here is you have the black line. We co-located it with a CDIP buoy off of Torrey Pines in San Diego. That black line is CDIP's wave measurements. And then that dark blue line, which you see fitting quite nicely to it, is the wave measurements that we were getting from our pressure sensor on board. So 2 different ways of discerning waves, but we came up with a very similar model, which is great. What I do want to point to here is that light blue line, which that is measuring low frequency, or showing low frequency infragravity waves, which are a type of gravity wave that the CDIP buoy can't actually get us, and they have an outsized impact on coastal flooding. So great to see with this test we did locally in San Diego that we're matching some of the data from the CDIP buoy, but also getting more, which is the idea. So 2 weeks ago, we put our first system out in Santa Cruz, in Monterey Bay off of Seacliff Beach. It's going to be out there for the next 6 months. It is, as of now, still transmitting, which is great. And the idea is that this could be part of a coastal observing network that we could scale up possibly. And it's also being done in conjunction with a shore-based camera system that State Parks is doing, which monitors shoreline water levels. So trying to get a more full picture of what coastal flooding looks like. So that's smart mooring. Actually, there's some data from our deployment that we have out in Santa Cruz right now. So this just gives you an idea of an acoustic Doppler current profiler. We've got our U and V coordinates. So that's just how you interpret these is the darker the color, the more significant the velocity. So in your U velocity, for example, dark red is going to be stronger current positive on your U axis, darker blue, stronger current on the negative side of your U axis. And the gray is like slack tides. So they're seeing tidal surges here, and the W is our vertical velocity. And then this plot I love, this is a composite of our thermistor chain. So you can see this is about 5 days of data, and you can see how we've got warmer. Our color bar on the right is water temperature. We've got date on our X, depth on our Y, and you're seeing warmer water kind of penetrate deeper cyclically with tides. And then it appears to be getting cooler overall, and whether that's seasonal change, whether that's nearshore mixing, who's to say, but we're getting great data from this so far. Cool. Now we're going to talk a little bit about island wakes. And as everybody who knows who's on Nantucket, islands are incredibly productive places for fisheries. You know, you can go Great Point Rip, the shoals, Bonita Bar, and there's all this upwelling, brings in more productivity, more fish. So similar thing in the Western Pacific. So we are interested in studying these island wakes for reasons of productivity and fisheries. So this is going back to some satellite imagery. This is some satellite imagery of the islands New Caledonia, Vanuatu, Fiji, and Tonga. And you can see we've got some great, beautiful blooms of phytoplankton eddy spinning off these islands where all this mixing is occurring. And that deeper blue water offshore, you can see it's just not very productive. So these islands are real hotspots for biodiversity and productivity. We're going to focus in a little further on Palau now. This is in the plot you're seeing, the animation you're seeing on the left is a animation of flow modeling, just showing an estimation based on observations, like what kind of the flow looks like around Palau. So Palau is 500 miles southeast of the Philippines. Population's about 18,000 people, and it's got the 42nd largest EEZ, which is exclusive economic zone, 200 miles out from its coast, has the rights to fisheries, mineral extraction, research. So it's very important for such a small island nation. It's got an enormous body of water that it's responsible for, and it's enormously productive. And so we are interested in studying that. Zoom out here and just show you where Palau is kind of globally, the red star there. And it's important to note that it sits right on the border of this large scale ocean mixing, which is the North Equatorial Current there and the Equatorial Countercurrent. The North Equatorial Current flows east to west, and is these currents also migrate north and south. And the North Equatorial Current is more dominant in Palau in November to May, and the Equatorial Countercurrent is more dominant the rest of the year. And so these are like the large scale open ocean mixing, and we're really focused on the sub-meso scale, which is a kilometer to 100 kilometers in size. So still big, but not global sized. So we're going to zoom back in on Palau here. This is the southern tip of the main island chain, an island called Peleliu. And this is just to show you this really beautiful bathymetric map from one of our local partners, Coral Reef Research Foundation. And just to give you an idea of how steep the bathymetry is here, it's very unlike Nantucket. The red is less than 10 meters. The deep blue is over 1,500. So you can just see it drops off vertically incredibly fast. And we're going to look at this channel here in a second, but this just gives you an idea of this moving water hits this and upwells really dramatically. And that red blob in the bottom there by the south tip of the island is called Hydrographer's Bank, which we'll look at in a second here. And then these are some of the vehicles we use to do our sampling, which we talked about the WAM-V, Slocum gliders. That gives you an idea of their profiling path, and a wave glider, which I mentioned, which is essentially a surfboard with solar panels, instrumentation, batteries, and is towed along by this sub that you see hanging 8 meters below it. And as the name implies, wave energy actually drives it. So it's very power generous and can recharge itself with its solar panels, but there nominally isn't a thruster spinning. It's just being pulled along by this sub using wave energy. So I'm going to let this run. This animation, I think, is a really great amalgamation of everything our lab does really well and kind of why we're a unique group. So first of all, what you're looking at here is an animation of a shore-based X-band radar on the island of Angar. The Angar is that central island you're seeing there in the black blob. And then the southern tip of Peleliu is that black blob you're seeing in the upper right. That bank that I mentioned a couple of slides ago is that oval you're seeing in the middle of the two. And so if we're just thinking about this bathymetry-wise, that bank is only 20 meters below the surface. So you have an immense amount of moving water from the Pacific hitting the side of Palau, upwelling, and then some of it is being forced through this very small channel and over the top of this bank. And so you can see currents in excess of 5 knots. It's an incredibly active location. So with the X-band radar, it operates like any boat-based radar would on principle, except whereas if you're running your boat and you have your gain turned down because you're interested in seeing hard targets like boats, shorelines, rocks, buoys, things like that, we dial our gain up because we're interested in seeing that sea clutter and not getting rid of it. So those big blobs you just saw moving through, those are rain squalls coming through. Those blow out our coverage. But all that sea surface stuff, so you're seeing an eddy shedding off the bank right now. So we're seeing surface signatures of island wakes and mixing on our radar. And then if we look at our legend in the top right, that black star you see moving around is the research vessel Thompson that we were on. This was last May. The different triangles you see are wave gliders. So we're using our wave gliders as scientific force multipliers. Instead of only being able to sample in one place at one time, we can be different places, which really helps our analyst determine conditions in the water. And instead of having to make inferences based on, okay, well, we're sampling here, what's happening over here, we can know. And so you have concurrent observations. And this is a good time. Those little red dots right there, going back to wave buoys. Those are wave buoys that we make in-house. They're not C-dip sized, and we use them as drifters. They're about the size of a basketball. And so we were tracking eddies with the ship and then seeding those eddies with wave buoys. And so not only are you seeing the eddies in the radar signature as the surface expression, but you're also seeing on GPS data our wave buoys being taken and spun by them. So this, I think, is just a really good representation of what our lab does. It brings together remote sensing, development, these wave buoys we build in-house, robotics, remote sensing, and shipboard observations. So this is one of our super, super talented analysts put this together. And I just think it's great in terms of situational awareness, and it really condenses over a week of ship time and work. So this is, you can see the bank here, a surface expression of a front coming off the bank. Yeah, great animation. And what's next for us is I am getting on a plane on Saturday and going back to Palau. We are joining the expedition vessel Nautilus on the 25th. We're going to be on board for a little over 2 weeks. And we are redoing our island wake survey. last time we were there in May, June. So we were Palau was more dominated by the equatorial countercurrent. And this time we're going to be there in November, December. So we're going to be more north equatorial current dominated. So it's going to be interesting to see what we observe and what changes from the last time we were there. And I'm just going to plug that the Nautilus is kind of an interesting ship where it's outside of the Utilal system, but they're very outreach and social media heavy. So if you go to nautiluslive.org, they're going to be live streaming our entire trip. When we're diving ROVs, you're going to be able to see inside the control van and see the cameras. When we're mapping, you're going to be able to see the acquisition systems. And when we are doing deck work, you're going to be able to see us putting vehicles in the water. We'll be doing a lot of outreach. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to check the website periodically and see what we're up to. But that does it for me. Thank you so much to MMA for putting this together, and thank you for inviting me. And thank you so much to everybody in my network who have helped me get to where I am, family, friends, and to all the scientists, engineers, technicians who I've worked with and been super fortunate to work with for 6 years and who I've learned so much from. But I still have a lot to learn and look forward to what's next.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That was phenomenal. And I am so excited to hear more about your upcoming Palau trip once you guys go back and you're able to counter that data set with the camera. It's pretty exciting. All right, everyone who is with us this evening, just as a reminder, if you have any questions for Charlie, please pop them in the Q&A section, and I'm happy to moderate the questions and answers. And while we wait for you guys to put your thinking caps on and ask some riveting questions, as I know that everyone definitely has some, I guess my first question is centered around thinking. Clearly, the technology that you guys are using in CORDC is very advanced. What has been one of the biggest advancements you've seen in your time in oceanographic research with regard to the updated technology and what data you're able to capture?
I think for me, it's less about what data is being captured and what data is being transmitted, if that makes sense. Just even in my time, I mean, when I first joined the ships, you had like 250 megabytes a day of data and you were loading email and HTML. And by the time I left 4 years later, you were able to stream YouTube and Netflix sitting in your bunk. And so you scale that up to like, there's just so much more data that can get off of these platforms, especially with, I think low Earth orbit systems like Starlink are going to be really important in the future, because as they become more power efficient, I think that's the biggest drawback right now, is just like that high data transmission is very power intensive and requires kind of big arrays. But right now, for example, the Slocum gliders that I operate, we put those offshore and we are getting maybe 5 to 10% of data transmitted back over the Iridium satellite network, which is enough for us to make decisions based off of and make piloting decisions, but isn't enough to really have a robust data set. And so you have to get the vehicle back to actually download that data. So if you lose a vehicle, it can be really catastrophic. Not really in so much of like losing the platform, but losing the data. That's the most important thing. So I think in terms of data transmission, that is where, and miniaturization of systems, that's going to be where exciting changes are made in terms of like making the ocean and ocean science more interconnected.
You answered my follow-up question. I love that.
Nice. There we go.
All right, first question from an anonymous attendee. How large is the worldwide fleet of research vessels, such as the ones that you've worked on?
The global fleet is probably a couple dozen ships. The global class that I was on is in US fleet was 4 ships. The US academic research fleet is not much. And in the past 15, 20 years, it's really gotten smaller. These ships are expensive to make and are very financially and like energy intensive. And it's why I think science communication is really important. It's important to, I think all this work is all really important, but it's even more important to make people understand how it impacts their lives and why it's important. It's why it's valuable, and to further grow the ARF. I will say that with ships will always be important. Ships will always have their place, but with advances in robotics, we have a lens into making discoveries in the ocean that we just didn't have 10, 20, like even 5 years ago. One program just to plug is the Argos program, which has a global network of 4,000 autonomous floats over the lifetime of the program that will have, each one has a 5-year lifespan, and we'll spend 5 years sampling the ocean, coming to the surface, transmitting their data, and working in conjunction with the JSON satellite altimeters. And that's just a publicly accessible data set. Anybody here could go online to Argos or Google Argos, and you can pull up an Argo float profile from anywhere in the ocean. And so I think you're going to see more in the coming years, more and more robots and autonomous systems in the ocean, and really accelerating the rate of discovery and conclusions.
Follow-up question from anonymous attendee. And how many of these are US controlled? I feel like you touched on that a little bit. And
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, yeah, there's a lot of other countries maintain a fleet of research vessels. The US is pretty extensive. Yeah, but most countries have at least like 1 or 2 research vessels, no matter if it's fishing boat size but like the large ones, it's definitely a smaller community.
Absolutely. Can you tell us, so you're about to embark on another trip. What is the typical day in the life of an oceanographic field research technician, engineer?
Drinking a lot of coffee and not sleeping a lot. It's your, I had a conversation with one of my friends the other day who we were planning a catch-up phone call, and he's like, well, I'll get you on Saturday because your day, or Sunday, whatever, was your day ahead. And I was like, I don't have my weekends off. So you're especially when you're on the ship, like you work a 12-hour watch and you have off watch, but you're really off work. So it's, but the ship time is so important. It's such a rare opportunity, and there's a lot that goes into it in terms of financial resources and time resources. And so it's super important to use it effectively. With the Revelle, for example, I think its day rate it cost about $50,000 a day to just exist, let alone not counting salary or anything, just the driving. So it's really, really valuable time, and the ships are limited resources. And so it's important to use it as efficiently as you can.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. Ship time is crucial. What's your dream mission and why?
Oh, man. Dream mission this is way out there. There is a French submarine that was lost during World War II that I don't need to find it, but I want somebody to find it. So I don't need to be a part of it, but it was a submarine built during World War II that was effectively a hybrid between a submarine and a battleship called the Surcouf. And I desperately need somebody to find that thing and figure out what happened to it. My dream mission, I really enjoy working in the Western Pacific. I really enjoy all the work. That's like, I think the beautiful thing about my job is that I'm always learning. I go to work and I feel like I'm getting a master's degree. So my dream is to kind of continue. I want to stay in the world of robotics. I want to keep learning. And I want to keep working with amazing scientists like Dr. Mika Siegelman, who's the head of the Smart Mooring Project, Dr. Sophia Merrifield, who is who I work under for the Island Wake Survey. And I feel so lucky to work with people like that who are out there asking questions that 99.9% of us don't even have any awareness of. And I think that's awesome.
So it's fair to say that you are in your dream mission in some ways.
I'm currently living it.
Yeah.
I'm lucky.
And to your point, I was sitting here thinking of how much smarter I was getting while just listening to you walk through the phenomenal work that you guys do. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn here. And this is I just want to deep dive into this world right away.
No, and I'm just scratching the surface. Hopefully I did some of the work that these scientists are doing justice.
I would say definitely. Kevin Barry asks, how can this research be applied to deal with the vast pollution worldwide in the oceans?
I think it's in terms of, there's like also there's carbon pollution, which leads to ocean acidification. There's like plastic pollution. There's like sewage outflows. It can be applied to all of it. I think the information is out there. It's getting that information communicated and applied so it becomes policy. I think that's the hard part, because there's enough people who are providing the info and the facts and figures. It's getting local, state, federal, global governments to act accordingly is the hard part.
Just fair, very diplomatic answer. So to that question, I guess, so CORDC is still part of Scripps. So what is the intent when you guys gather this data? What is the intent of, the output of that data? Is it just for, each individual scientist project or research and study, or does it have the educational rather goal? Is it, governmental? If that's something
it very much depends on the project. Like you've got smart mooring, which there will certainly do some research from that data set in terms of, I think, especially how low frequency infragravity waves, what their impact on coastal flooding might be. I don't think it's a relationship that's understood, but I think we can always learn more. So something like that, it's about situational awareness. For the island wake study, the desire is to, publish for our PIs to publish a paper. But I think also it's a development problem. And we're unique in that sense where it's learning about, okay, we can see these surface signatures with radar. Okay, can we track them with robots? Okay, can we track them? So that's one of the big aspects of our lab, which I think is unique, is that there's a very big development aspect of it in terms of developing new sampling and observation methods.
And through that development, do you guys do a lot of collaborative work with any other organizations, with any universities? Can you speak more to that?
We have collaborators, like on any one of these research projects, like this island wake study, for example. There might be principal investigators who's the chief scientist from, like after this trip to Palau, I'm going to Guam on a separate trip that's also an island wakes trip, and there's going to be partners on board from at least half a dozen U.S. research institutions, colleagues in Taiwan. So there is a lot of collaboration. It's a very collaborative field.
Awesome. Question from anonymous attendee. Billionaires today seem to need either a space program or an undersea program. How do the professionals like you regard the latter? Do they do serious work, or are these just vanity projects?
How to answer this diplomatically. I think space exploration is amazing. I'm not going to diminish like any kind of science and development and engineering. I think space exploration is amazing. I think some of the stuff that SpaceX is doing is unbelievable. I think probably like everybody who saw the video of them catching a rocket booster with a tower is like one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen. I don't think you have to have any engineering appreciation to appreciate that fact. I don't think that oceanography gets the funding that it should, and people get excited about it as they should. On the same level of space exploration, we know so little about especially our deep oceans. I think that's especially critical as we move into an era where deep sea mining is going to be occurring, and it's one of the last fairly unspoiled habitats on our planet, and we're talking about wide scale mineral exploitation, and I don't think we fully understand the downstream effects of that. So I think getting people excited about it, hopefully people like me talking about it, hopefully people wanting to get into the field, tuning into stuff like the Nautilus and watching an ROV dive and recognizing that, for me, having done ROV dives and been in control vans where no one's over sites where no one's dived before, and every time the lights illuminate something, it's like you're some of the first people to ever see it, and it's like looking at the cameras of the Mars rover. So I don't know. Ocean science, I think people should be more excited about it. How to make that happen, I think is a harder question, but hopefully stuff like this and the space you guys create is a part of it.
So what advice do you have for any budding young oceanographers? What steps should they take? How should they network? What should they be doing at this young, even younger stage in their career that, they can one day be a Charles Brooks or even a scientist that you work with?
It's such a diverse field I think that's the best thing. There's a million ways to get into it. You can be an educator, you can be a researcher, you can be an engineer, you can be a technician. They're my old group. In terms of just like being a technician, for example, there were people who worked in that group who had master's degrees. There were people who had bachelor's degrees. There were people who got out of high school and went to boat building school. And so if you want to go to college, fantastic. If science is your passion, fantastic. Go get a master's degree, go get a PhD, like help answer these problems, answer these questions and solve these problems that we so need to have happen. That's fantastic. If you're on the engineering side of things, like great. And you want to go to college, fantastic. Go get an engineering degree, help design the next generation of ocean robots that are going to be sampling our oceans. If you don't want to go to college, also fantastic. There's still a path. If you want to be a professional mariner, go to a maritime academy, come work on a research vessel. UNOLS is pushing these internships onto the maritime academies now, and the ships don't pay as well as industry, but your life experience from the people that I've sailed with is awesome. You go to amazing places, you do amazing work, you work with amazing people. So just if you want to work in ocean science, like figure out what your passion is. You don't necessarily have to fit the square peg into the round hole and force yourself to go get a PhD. If that's not where your passions lie, but there's a million ways to get into the field. And if you are on this call and you want to be the next charge books, like reach out to me. I work with IRIS alumni, the tech school I went to a lot, and help them work on applications for research vessel positions and made internships. So I want to see more people kind of get into the industry and succeed, because it's an amazing career path.
And very underexplored, as you mentioned.
Very underexplored, rife with opportunity.
So, anonymous attendee, follow-up question. And who are the rock stars in undersea robotics? Who's the SpaceX of the undersea?
Ooh, who's the SpaceX of undersea? I think if we're talking the SpaceX of undersea, like doing great work, very flashy, like kind of what's getting the headlines, it would be companies like Triton, which you may have seen them in these like nature documentaries. They're these incredibly beautifully made manned submersibles with these big acrylic domes. Like they're very space age. They like if you have an idea of what a futuristic submersible looks like, they're probably them. So companies like that. There's also lots of amazing companies making amazing undersea robots. We run ROVs made by Saab. Weirdly enough, there's in our own backyard in Massachusetts, Teledyne Web Research, which makes buoyancy gliders, autonomous vehicles called the Gavia. Hydroid is also based in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, and especially like Cape Cod around Woods Hole, is actually a real hub for ocean robotics, which is very cool.
I would agree. And the question that I just had pop into my brain, just with us having most recently launched or deployed rather our environmental monitoring oceanographic buoy in the Nantucket harbor, I'm just thinking about you guys being out on research trips for extended periods of time. How do you deal with maintaining the integrity of your instruments on board and while you're out for long periods of time, as well as how do you combat the different biofouling issues that you can run into?
Luckily, with a lot of the short duration vehicles we use, biofouling isn't a huge impediment, just because they don't go out for long enough. Stuff like the wave gliders, for example, don't go out for months at a time. The hulls themselves are painted with copper paint, which has some properties that combat biofouling. Old wooden ships had like copper bottoms, so we figured this one out quite a while ago. It's inevitable; it happens. On certain instrument faces, we will actually coat them in diaper rash cream called Destin, because that fights off biofouling. If you back at that image of the instrument we put off of Santa Cruz, you'll see the ADCP's faces are all white. That's baby rash cream. I don't know why it works, but it does. And in terms of maintaining equipment offshore, you bring a lot of spares, and you're your own Home Depot, and you have to really be prepared for any failures you can think of. And for smaller vehicles, like less high profile systems, like you might have some spare parts. When I sailed with the ROV Jason in New Zealand in 2021, if they dropped the vehicle, they basically could build a spare with their spare parts, which like you don't want to drop a multi-million-dollar ROV. That's a really bad day, but
Not at all.
they were prepared for basically every possible failure up to complete loss.
That if they had to rebuild on the spot, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. Not what you want to do. Bad phone call to make, but they were ready for a lot. That's the key, is just it's like anything else in life, it's just preparedness.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with regard to the smart mooring system, are there any biofouling concerns that you guys have with that? I know that's also not deployed for an extensive period of time either, it seems. But
now it's going to go out for 6 months. And we recovered with the one we had this summer for local testing was 3 months, and it was coated. So there's, like I said, the sensitive sensor faces, we will do what we can to protect them in ways that doesn't result in acoustic interference, or interfering with like a thermistor, for example. But at the end of the day, it's you get it back, and you get an undergrad to spray it off the power washer.
Fair enough. And I guess a follow-up to that is, do you see these smart mooring systems having, relevant applications to the East Coast in particular? And I'm thinking of Nantucket, even with the coastal flooding that we even see here. I know it's definitely not as significant as some of those Californian events. However, with changing climates, with changing water, sea level rise, is that something you see having value off of the shores of Nantucket in particular?
Totally. Yeah, I think totally. And CDIP, for example, like if you go to their website, I think it's just cdip.com, you can see their station map, and there's 3 buoys. There's not one off Nantucket, but there's one in Cape Cod Bay. There's 2 more nearby. And so these systems are everywhere, and that's just one sampling platform. Smart mooring, absolutely. I think that's our hope, is that it's something that maybe we either carry on, well, for short term, we carry on this partnership with state parks. We have funding for 3 of them right now. We have one out there. We make it more stable, more effective, and get more of them out there in partnership with state parks. And then from there, who knows how it could expand. But I think more situational awareness and more data is in no way a bad thing in any application.
Right. I would agree. I think it would be really interesting for one to be deployed in either Nantucket or even Nantucket Harbor, just thinking of how much, the sea level has changed even in my 11 years being here. Like what comes.
I think that'd be interesting from the pressure perspective, and also just in terms of data processing. I've got my head wrapped around processing thermistor data more than ADCP data this time, but I'm working on it. But just seeing how temperature changes, like I'm wondering if somebody is doing that in Nantucket Harbor, but installing a series of temperature chains in Nantucket Harbor, out like maybe in Nantucket, Harbor Mouth, Pulpus, up harbor, and just seeing how water masses are moving in the harbor would be really interesting. I'm sure somebody's done that work, but that'd be super interesting.
And it's something that we're always thinking about as well. And our goal is to, definitely expand our buoy platform, whether it is, through deploying more buoys or just changing the parameters that we're measuring for. So it's definitely something that we're working with all of our, conservation organizations, or hopefully working with them to be able to do.
Cool. That's awesome.
That info is really important.
Yeah, that's very cool.
All right, a couple more questions before we wrap up, out of respect for everyone's time. Do you ever have issues of fishermen or mariners picking up your robotic vessels?
Yes. The number of times, doesn't matter how many stickers you put on top of an oceanographic instrument that says oceanographic instrument, do not remove from water. It is like a neon sign for somebody to pick it up. And it happens all the time. We've had wave buoys get picked up and end up back in people's garages. And people want reward money, and it happens a lot.
And is there a specific segment of the industry or aspect of the research that you think is primed to benefit from artificial intelligence in the near term?
I think all of it. I think AI is a tool that we're seeing more and more. I mean, we do have in our lab, that's one of the amazing things about our lab, is we're, I think, the biggest at Scripps. And so we have engineers, we've got data scientists, we've got analysts, and we have people who are experts in machine learning and AI. And so I think you're going to see that being used more and more as a tool to help do things from generate code to just identify, for example, if we go back to that VPR, for example, that I was talking about, where if you could have AI look through 100,000 still images and throw out 80,000 of them that have nothing in it, or the organism's out of focus, and then from there point you at, okay, here's the 1,000 that are the best. So I think it's like anything else, it's a tool. It's like only as good or bad as we use it. And I think it's gonna be, in terms of just the mountains of data you can be looking at in ocean science, I think it's going to be a really powerful tool for combing through that and helping people do analysis and make decisions.
I agree with you. Charlie, any parting words or thoughts or anything that you'd like to share with our listeners this evening that either we haven't touched on in our questions, or just something that you think is important for us to know?
Just appreciate the space that you guys have created, and that I'm not sure how many people are on, but that all of you took the time tonight to sit down and learn about ocean science. And I know people do this regularly, and just stay involved. And if there's one of my big passions, like in terms of my career, is, like I said, I've done work with like IRIS students and people looking to get a foothold in it, because it is very reputation based, and knowing people really helps. So if there's anybody on who this is something you want to do and you're interested in it, like, I'm so open to talking to students, people, whoever, who want to learn about this industry and learn how to get their foot in the door. Just because it's been a really amazing career path for me for the past 6 years, and I barely scratched the surface.
And we know that you'll continue to dig deeper, for sure. I think it would be great when you're next back on Nantucket, maybe not in short term, because if you're home this year, but maybe next year when you have a pocket of time, we think of a way to share this information and some of these resources with Nantucket high school students, if that's something that you'd be interested in and open to.
I would love to. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
we all know a few people that can make that happen. So
yeah, absolutely. But check on us the next couple weeks on EV Nautilus. It's always cool to watch some ROV dives and just see how that goes. It's live streams, and hopefully we're going to be diving in some places that no one's dived on before. So you'll be exploring like the rest of us. So come along.
Yes, and you'll have to come back and follow up on your findings.
Time. It'll be fun.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for sharing your just everything that you've done over your career. You say that it's a short career, but I don't think of experience in terms of length of time, but in breadth and depth of knowledge. And you have an extensive depth and breadth of knowledge. So please, please, please give yourself credit where credit is due. I think it's amazing the work that you and your team are committed to doing. And I'm so grateful that we have people who are passionate about exploring the ocean and learning from the ocean, because to your point, yes, we spend a lot of time, trying to figure out what's going on above us, but the ocean is mostly unexplored and we live here with it. So I think it's really important, the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for sharing your academic experience with us, your work experience with us, and the work that you're lending, or rather the time that you're lending to developing oceanographic engineering and research. And with that, it concludes our November Science Speaker Series at the Murray Mitchell Association. Again, thank you to Charles Brooks this evening for his wonderful presentation. Thank you for everyone joining us this evening, taking time out of your schedule, as well as thank you to Bank of America, our lead sponsor for our Science Speaker Series. And we will see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.